Distraction quietly drains time, energy, and money more than failure ever does. Failure is loud, it gets your attention, it forces reflection, correction, and growth. Distraction, on the other hand, feels harmless. It disguises itself as rest, entertainment, connection, or productivity. But while failure teaches, distraction steals. It steals minutes that turn into hours, hours that turn into years, and years that turn into missed potential you can never reclaim. Failure has an ending, distraction doesn't. When you fail, you eventually stop, reassess, and choose a new direction. When you're distracted, you keep moving without realizing you're going nowhere. You stay busy but unfulfilled, active but unproductive, informed but ineffective. The danger isn't that you're doing nothing. The danger is that you're doing everything except what actually matters. Distraction drains energy first. Every notification, every unnecessary conversation, every open tab pulls a small piece of your mental fuel. You don't feel it immediately, but by the end of the day, you're exhausted without knowing why. Not because the work was hard, but because your attention was constantly switching. Your brain pays a tax every time it shifts focus, and that tax compounds. Over time, you lose the ability to sit with difficult tasks, to think deeply, to push through resistance. What once required effort now feels unbearable. Time is the next casualty. Distraction doesn't steal time in large chunks. It takes it in fragments, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, a quick check that turns into an hour, and because the loss is fragmented, it goes unnoticed, but those fragments add up to days of lost progress, months of delayed growth, and years of postponed success. Failure might set you back temporarily, but distraction keeps you permanently behind schedule. Money follows focus. When attention is scattered, execution suffers. When execution suffers, results decline. Opportunities are missed not because they didn't exist, but because you weren't present enough to recognize or act on them. Distraction slows learning, weakens decision making, and reduces output. Over time, that translates into fewer skills, fewer results, and fewer financial rewards. You don't go broke from one bad decision. You go broke from thousands of distracted ones. Distraction also erodes self-trust. Each time you choose avoidance over effort, your confidence quietly takes a hit. You start to doubt your ability to concentrate, to commit, to finish what you start. You make promises to yourself and break them in small ways that feel insignificant, but they add up. Eventually, you stop expecting discipline from yourself. Failure might shake your confidence temporarily, but distraction dismantles it slowly and consistently. The most dangerous part is that distraction feels productive. You're consuming information, responding to messages, staying updated, staying busy. But activity is not progress. Motion is not momentum. You can run in circles all day and feel exhausted without moving an inch closer to your goals. Distraction creates the illusion of effort without the reward of results, and that illusion keeps people trapped for years. Failure forces clarity, distraction clouds it. When you fail, you're confronted with reality. You see what doesn't work, you adjust. When you're distracted, you avoid that confrontation. You delay decisions. You postpone discomfort. You numb the tension that comes with growth. And in doing so, you trade short-term relief for long-term regret. Focus, unlike motivation, doesn't depend on emotion. It depends on boundaries. It requires deciding what deserves your attention and what doesn't. Distraction thrives in the absence of intention. When your days aren't designed, they're hijacked. When your priorities aren't clear, everything feels urgent. And when everything feels urgent, nothing meaningful gets done. Failure can be a turning point. Distraction is a slow leak. One can change your direction overnight. The other quietly ensures you never arrive. That's why the cost of distraction is higher than the cost of failure. Failure challenges you to rise. Distraction convinces you to settle. The people who build extraordinary lives aren't immune to failure. They're ruthless about protecting focus. They understand that attention is finite and priceless. They treat it like capital, investing it only where it compounds, because in the end, success isn't about avoiding failure. It's about eliminating distraction long enough to do the work that failure eventually teaches you to master. Millionaires design their environment to protect focus, not willpower. They understand that willpower is unreliable, inconsistent, and easily exhausted. It fades with stress, emotion, hunger, and fatigue. Relying on it is like building a business on motivation alone, unstable and unsustainable. Instead, they build systems that make focus the default and distraction the exception. They don't wake up hoping to have a productive day. They wake up inside a structure that quietly guides their behavior. Their phones aren't the first thing they see in the morning. Notifications aren't allowed to interrupt deep work. Their workspace is intentionally minimal, not because they like simplicity, but because clarity demands it. Every unnecessary item is a potential distraction, and distractions are treated like expenses. Environment shapes behavior more than discipline ever could. When temptation is within reach, the brain eventually gives in. High performers don't test their self-control all day. They remove the test entirely. If social media is a distraction, it's deleted, blocked, or restricted. If certain people drain energy, access is limited. If clutter creates mental noise, it's eliminated. This isn't extreme, it's strategic. Focus thrives in frictionless systems. The easier it is to start important work, the more consistently it gets done. That's why tools, schedules, and routines are designed to reduce resistance. Work begins at the same time each day. Decisions are minimized, meals, clothing, and daily rhythms are simplified. Every ounce of mental energy saved from trivial choices is redirected toward you thinking and execution. They also understand that environment isn't just physical, it's digital and social. What you consume shapes how you think. What you listen to influences how you act. That's why attention is guarded. Endless news cycles, constant opinions, and reactive conversations are filtered out. Not because they don't care, but because they care deeply about what they are building. Focus requires selective ignorance. The people around you are part of your environment. Millionaires are intentional about proximity. They spend time with people who value depth over drama, progress over gossip, and action over excuses. This doesn't mean cutting everyone off. It means being conscious about influence. Energy is contagious and focus is fragile. One unfocused conversation can undo hours of disciplined work. Their environment also enforces recovery. Rest isn't accidental, it's scheduled. Sleep is protected. Downtime is intentional, not endless scrolling disguised as rest. This allows focus to regenerate. Burnout is avoided not through willpower, but through design. When recovery is built in, performance becomes sustainable. The goal isn't to become superhuman, the goal is to stop fighting human nature. Humans follow the path of least resistance. Millionaires simply make the right path easier and the wrong path harder. When focus is supported by the environment, consistency becomes automatic. This is why they win quietly. Not because they're stronger, but because they're smarter about what they allow around them. They don't rely on discipline to save them from distraction. They eliminate distraction before discipline is even required. Every notification steals compound progress, not in an obvious way, not all at once, but quietly and consistently. It pulls you out of momentum, fractures your attention, and forces your mind to restart. What looks like a harmless interruption is actually a reset button on progress, and when progress depends on consistency, resets are expensive. Compound progress requires depth. It requires staying with a problem long enough for understanding to mature, for ideas to connect, for skill to sharpen. The moment a notification interrupts that process, the chain breaks. You don't return to the same mental state. You return to a weaker version of it. Something is lost every time. Clarity, intensity, rhythm. Over days and weeks, those losses accumulate. Notifications train reactivity. Each buzz conditions your brain to respond instead of create. You begin living on alert, constantly waiting for the next interruption. Even when notifications are silent, the anticipation remains. Part of your attention stays on standby, ready to be pulled away. That divided focus lowers the quality of everything you do. even when you think you're concentrating. The real cost isn't the seconds spent checking a message, it's the minutes it takes to regain depth afterward. It's the ideas you don't finish, the decisions you delay, the work you rush just to feel caught up. Compound progress thrives on uninterrupted stretches of effort, and notifications are designed to break exactly that. Momentum is fragile. Once broken, it takes intention to rebuild, but when interruptions are frequent, momentum never fully forms. You stay in a shallow mode of thinking, busy, responsive, but not effective. Growth slows, learning plateaus, execution becomes mechanical instead of strategic. Over time, constant interruption rewires your attention span. Deep work starts to feel uncomfortable, silence feels boring, focus feels heavy, the mind craves stimulation instead of challenge. This is how long-term potential is eroded, not through lack of talent, but through lack of sustained attention. Compound progress doesn't show up daily. That's why it's easy to trade it for instant feedback. Notifications offer quick hits of relevance, validation, and novelty. They feel rewarding in the moment, but they come at the expense of long-term outcomes that require patience to materialize. You choose the immediate signal over the future result again and again, often without realizing it. The most successful people understand this trade-off. They treat their attention like capital. Anything that interrupts it must justify its cost. Most notifications can't. They add noise without value. They create urgency where none exists, and urgency is the enemy of strategy. When attention is protected, progress compounds naturally, skills sharpen faster, decisions improve, confidence grows, work builds on itself. But when attention is constantly interrupted, progress resets to zero over and over again. You're always starting, never stacking. Every notification is a choice made for you unless you take control. And every time it pulls you away, it steals not just your moment, but the future that moment could have built. Focused execution beats talent, intelligence, and motivation because results don't come from what you could do, but from what you consistently do. Talent creates potential, intelligence creates options. Motivation creates desire, but execution turns intention into outcomes, and focus is what makes execution effective. Talent without execution is unused capacity. It looks impressive on paper and disappointing in reality. History is full of gifted people who never built anything meaningful because their effort was scattered. They started many things, finished few, and mastered none. Focused execution doesn't require extraordinary ability. It requires the discipline to work on the same problem long enough for progress to accumulate. Intelligence can even become a disadvantage without focus. Smart people often overthink, overanalyze, and delay action. They see too many possibilities and struggle to commit to one path. Focused execution simplifies the game. It narrows attention to the next concrete step and removes the paralysis of choice. Progress favors those who move, not those who contemplate endlessly. Motivation is the least reliable of all. It rises and falls with mood, environment, and external validation. Waiting to feel motivated is a slow way to win. Focused execution doesn't negotiate with feelings, it operates on schedule, not inspiration. When the work is done daily, motivation becomes irrelevant. Results create motivation, not the other way around. Execution compounds, each focused action builds on the last. Skills sharpen through repetition, confidence grows through completion, systems improve through feedback. This compounding effect is why average ability, applied consistently, outperforms exceptional ability applied sporadically. One person executes at 80% every day, another executes at 100% once a week. Over time, the first pulls far ahead. Focus is what protects execution from dilution. Without focus, effort spreads thin. Energy is wasted switching between tasks, chasing new ideas, and reacting to distractions. Focus concentrates effort into a single direction, increasing the force of every action. Less work produces more impact because it's aligned and intentional. Focused execution also creates trust. both internal and external. Internally, you begin to trust yourself because you follow through. Externally, others trust you because you deliver. Talent and intelligence might earn attention, but execution earns credibility. In any field, the person who consistently produces becomes indispensable. The marketplace doesn't reward potential, it rewards output. It doesn't care how smart you are or how motivated you feel. It responds to value delivered, problems solved, and results achieved. Focused execution is how value is created repeatedly without relying on perfect conditions. This is why focused execution wins long term. It's available to anyone willing to commit. It doesn't require rare genetics or constant inspiration. It requires structure, clarity, and persistence. When focus directs execution day after day, talent becomes sharpened, intelligence becomes applied, and motivation becomes unnecessary. What you tolerate distracting you determines what you'll never achieve. Not because distractions are powerful, but because tolerance is a decision repeated daily. Every time you allow an interruption to pull you away from what matters, you're casting a quiet vote against the future you say you want. The cost isn't immediate, which is why it's easy to ignore, but over time, those small allowances add up to permanent limitations. Distraction isn't just something that happens to you, it's something you permit. And what you permit becomes a pattern. That pattern shapes your habits, your attention, and eventually your identity. You don't wake up one day far from your goals by accident. You drift there, one tolerated distraction at a time. The mind adapts to what it's exposed to. If it's constantly pulled toward noise, novelty, and urgency, it loses its ability to stay with complexity and discomfort. Deep work starts to feel heavy. Long-term goals feel distant. The effort required to build something meaningful feels unnatural. This isn't a lack of ambition. It's the result of training your attention on the wrong things. Distractions often disguise themselves as obligations. Messages that need replies, requests that feel rude to decline, information that seems important to stay updated on. But urgency is rarely aligned with importance. When everything is treated as urgent, priorities disappear. You spend your days reacting instead of directing, responding instead of building. Tolerance also shows up in your environment. A cluttered workspace, constant background noise, open tabs, endless notifications. Each one is a signal that focus is optional. Over time, the brain stops expecting clarity. It learns to operate in chaos, and chaos is a terrible place to create excellence. The people you tolerate around you matter too. Conversations filled with complaints, gossip, and distraction drain more than time. They drain perspective. They normalize mediocrity. When distraction becomes social, it becomes harder to resist because it feels acceptable. But what's acceptable is rarely what's exceptional. Every meaningful achievement requires sustained attention. Mastery demands repetition. Growth demands discomfort. None of that survives in an environment where distraction is constantly allowed. You don't fail because you aren't capable. You fail because the conditions you tolerate never allow your capabilities to fully develop. This is why boundaries are not selfish, they are necessary. Saying no isn't about rejection, it's about protection. Protecting your attention, your energy, and your future. When you refuse to tolerate distraction, you're not being rigid, you're being intentional. The hardest part is that tolerance feels harmless in the moment. One more scroll, one more conversation, one more delay, but the future is shaped by accumulation, not intention. What you consistently tolerate today becomes the ceiling you can't break tomorrow. If you want different results, you don't need more discipline or motivation. You need fewer allowances, fewer excuses for interruption, fewer justifications for delay. The line between who you are and who you could become is drawn by what you allow to distract you. What you protect grows. What you tolerate persists, and what you tolerate distracting, you will quietly decide everything you never achieve.